Hello, Bobby Torres of Frightbox Recording here with 5 tips that will instantly improve your mixes if you put them to use. Tip number 1, intentionally limit your tools. And more specifically, in the modern day, limit the amount of plugins that you use. Here's the problem. When you sit down to mix, and let's say you're working on a snare drum as an example, auditioning 20 different compressors on your snare drum is not gonna help improve the sound of your mix. Believe me, I've learned the hard way. We also have to remember this. A lot of us kind of want to emulate the sound of classic records that were recorded well before DAWs even existed. And a lot of these albums were made on extremely simple setups. A console, maybe a few pieces of outboard gear, a tape machine. Now, even though we glorify these analog setups, for some reason we like to make our lives complicated when we mix within a computer. And engineers back then produced amazing results using mainly the stock EQ on their consoles and stock compressors and maybe a handful of other pieces of outboard gear that they used in conjunction with their console. So my tip here is to kind of try and take some of that mindset and apply it to your workflow within your DAW by intentionally limiting your tools and maybe picking only 3 compressors to use, maybe only 2 EQs to use, 2 reverbs, not 30 reverbs, not 100 different compressors, because endlessly scrolling through an endless list of plugins is nothing but a waste of time. Tip number 2 when it comes to improving the sound of your mixes, give yourself permission to take breaks. We have to remember that human perception is not perfect. When you're mixing a song hour after hour, day after day, obsessively, it's very easy to lose sight of the big picture and difficult to hear your mix in an objective way. And I know because I used to be guilty of this, and a lot of times I would actually be making my mix worse. Eventually, I learned that by giving myself breaks and sometimes maybe walking away from a mix for a day or two, I'll regain a fresh perspective and quickly hear things that are sticking out that I wasn't even noticing because I was so hyper-focused on an area that really wasn't that important. So always give yourself permission to walk away and take breaks. It'll actually help you mix faster and just better overall. Okay, and this leads me to tip number 3. Set hard deadlines for yourself. We're all guilty of this, working on a mix for months, maybe even years when it comes to like an EP or an album. And here's the thing, by mixing the same songs over and over and over again, that's not the way to get good at mixing. The secret to getting good at mixing is to mix a high volume of different music regularly. And the only way you're gonna finish projects is if you set hard deadlines for yourself and you stick to those deadlines. That's why, for example, let's say you're working on a single for your band, announce publicly when you plan on releasing your single so you're held accountable to get your project done by that date. Deadlines are a good thing, and in my opinion and through my own experience, they actually help you become a better producer and mixer overall because you're forced to get things done. And this leads me to tip number 4. When you sit down to mix, do yourself a favor. Focus on the basics. If you're working on music that was relatively well recorded and the music was written right in the first place, you shouldn't need to be whipping out obscure, overly complicated mixing techniques. Balance, panning, basic EQ moves. This is where the bulk of your mix should really be coming from. If you've ever watched interviews with some big time mixers and watched them mix sections of a song, you're gonna notice that they're using very basic techniques. It's just that they're paying attention to the song and working with the material that's there and kind of breathing extra life into it with level, panning, automation, basic EQ moves. People like to turn this into rocket science, but it really doesn't have to be that way. Now, I'm not saying to never try something unique like parallel compression or MS processing or things like that, but just keep in mind that 80% of your results are gonna come from the basics. Okay, finally, mixing tip number 5, and it's my favorite one of all. Embrace and accept the fact that you will never sound like your favorite mixer. Now, a lot of times when we get started, we want to emulate our favorite producers and mixers, and we try to make our production sound exactly like theirs. But the truth is that it'll never sound exactly like theirs because we're all unique. We all hear things differently, and production and mixing is really the result of thousands and thousands of minute, small, little moves or techniques that build up throughout the course of an entire project. For example, when I started, I wanted my mixes to sound a lot like Andy Sneap's and maybe even Dan Korneff's. And to be honest, my productions didn't really mature to the level that they're at now until I accepted the fact that I'll never sound like those guys and I should just focus on sounding like myself. And here's the other thing, if you pay attention to the work of all these different great mixers, they all have their own unique sound. So for example, Chris Lord-Alge sounds like Chris Lord-Alge. He sounds like no one else. Dan Corneff sounds like Dan Corneff. He sounds like no one else. Andy Sneap sounds like Andy Sneap. He sounds like no one else. And a lot of this comes down to the simple fact, again, like I said, is that we're all unique. Now, if I can go back in time and talk to my younger self, this by far will be the #1 tip I would tell myself. To embrace the fact that I don't sound like my favorite mixers and to focus on sounding like myself, and I highly recommend you do the same. This mindset will 100% definitely help your productions and help you get to that next level that you're probably looking to get to. Okay, and those are my top 5 tips on how I feel you can instantly improve your mixes once you adopt them. And I'm curious to know, do you utilize any of these tips already? Are there some of these that you haven't even thought of using? Or maybe you're using all 5. Let me know by leaving a comment in the comment section below and let me know your opinion. I'd love to hear it. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload one of my weekly videos on all things Metal and Rock production. If you're interested in some Frightbox swag, I've got t-shirts, mugs, and other cool stuff on the way. There's a link below to the Frightbox merch store in this video's description. Now, I don't want you getting caught up in gear and spending money on unnecessary things that are gonna help your productions at the end of the day anyway. And this is why I've put together my 5-step guide to better heavy mixes. I want you to achieve better results with the gear you already have. Simply download the free guide and apply these techniques to your future productions and listen to how much they help improve the sound of your future mixes. And until next time, happy mixing.